Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Beale, Chair of the committee, and obviously I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. This evening is live streamed on YouTube. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to ask members of the committee to, and everyone else here, to make sure their mobiles are on silent and turned off, because we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. If we have received apologies for absence from Councillor Benton. Do any members have any interest to declare? No. The minutes of the previous meeting on 13th of May have been circulated. Can I sign them as a correct record?
Agreed.
Yes, sorry, can I just make a comment on them?
Is it a correction of fact?
Potentially, yes.
Yes, go on.
So I raised the fact that as some members of the public who were here, including Survivors Tower, mentioned that it appears that the coroner's recommendations have not been implemented, and how serious that was. I'm not really seeing that being reflected here. Meanwhile, we are seeing it reflected that the paper was introduced as the work was introduced in response to the coroner's recommendations. And I think in terms of actions that need to happen and the seriousness of where we're at, given that these are prevention of future deaths, and we are talking about Grenfell survivors.
So you feel you've raised something and that's not reflected in the minutes. Yusuf, would you mind having a re-listen? Yeah. And we will amend them, see what Yusuf says and amend them. And if he thinks there's no reason to amend them, I will also come back to you to query it or dispute it with me. And then we'll separately. So sort of on that note, other than that, I'm glad if I think so. Okay. So item 4 is the report from the Metropolitan Police. It provides an overview of police activity in the borough over the last year, crime data, and the police's priorities. So I would like to welcome 3 people who are going to present the report. So we've got Chief Superintendent Christina Jesser. We've got Superintendent Owen Ronalden, who's well known to us all, I think, who's the neighbourhood policing and detective, who's the DCU command neighbourhood policing, and Superintendent Dean Lanfield, local investigations, and they 3 of them between them, perhaps the triple act is going to do other reports. Sorry, I made such a fool, right?
We do all the same thing, right?
So,
Chair, committee members, thank you very much for inviting me back last year. It's been a busy year for us in policing, and today you heard the announcement from the spending review about what policing will be receiving.
Can I just ask you to speak up, because there are people behind you as well, and I know that everybody wants to hear what you've got to say.
Okay.
Maybe you don't have one, so you just have to speak a bit louder.
Thank you. So I was just saying today has been a busy day for us, as we heard the announcement from the spending review for policing, what we would be getting for the foreseeable future. And actually, whilst it's been presented as an increase in real terms, actually what we're feeling at the moment, it's only been a few hours since the announcement was made, is that actually it's going to just about cover our pay the staff. So there are a number of challenges that we are going to be faced with within this financial year and going forward. Our focus still remains on violence against women and girls, on reducing violence, particularly knife crime, and on making policing presence. We know that the monies that have been offered are for a national policing picture, so we don't know how much the Met will receive and then how much Kensington and Chelsea will receive, but as you all know Owen really well, he will definitely keep you up to date. For us, looking at the last year and the report itself, I'm really pleased on the backdrop of what we've had to deal with. Actually, we have seen reductions in a number of crime areas, particularly theft from and theft of motor vehicles, which we know was raised at last year's committee. Violence, particularly robbery, knife robbery, has seen reductions, and also burglary. And they are areas which we know for residents and clearly councillors are areas of crime that are flagged to you when you meet with your constituents. So we are pleased with that. What we know there are gaps with, particularly theft of person, so pickpocketing particularly, and also theft in retail outlets, which has seen a marked increase. That is one area that we will be trying to put much more attention in this year without losing the gains that we've had so far. I'm working really closely with Owen on how we do that. You all know there's been some challenges around our provision in schools and some of the tough choices we're now having to make as a result of our budget deficit. But my key focus this year is to stay focused on the violence against women and girls work we've been doing to make young people feel safe when they're walking around the borough and coming back and forth from school, etc. And also to help retailers in the spaces that they haven't been able to so far to deal with business crime.
Thank you. And are your colleagues going to say anything?
I'll always take the opportunity to speak, you know that. I'll say the same thing I said last year. This is always a good reminder to me that the year goes very quickly, and we're here again. It doesn't seem that long ago we were here last time. I fully appreciate, I think in the room there'll be differing views of the effectiveness of policing on the borough, different ways. But I do think there are some real achievements about what we have done. So most of you know me fairly well. My colleagues at the council know me really well. A big thing for me is about the relationship building, relationships. I've deliberately asked to stay in my post here because I feel there's unfinished business, but also because you need consistency of leadership on the borough. That's really important. That's something we discussed. That's something that I'm really keen that we meet that obligation. We see that through because I think there has been a high turnover at times. I'm not knowing anyway, good news or bad news, but we'll see. But relationships are really important. We are leading the way London-wide on a lot of those relationships. So that is our relationship with the local authority, which is not reflected across London. I work very, very closely with my colleagues at the local authority, and I call them colleagues because it is a partnership and we have to work together on a lot of the issues that we'll talk about tonight. But also with our business improvement districts. So interestingly, I've heard that in a room of business improvement districts, there's a lot of discussion around the effectiveness of the relationships with police. And it's our business improvement districts that put their hands up to say, actually, that's not our experience. It's really good here. And we are now being looked at London-wide about what we do because it's working. It's not perfect, but it is working. So I think it sets the tone of what we're trying to do on the borough, which is we collaborate really well and we try and jointly problem solve. It's not perfect, but we're trying to get there. I know you'll come up in questions anyway, so there's bits I want to go through, but that's where I am. I think there's been some really good work, which I'll hopefully get to talk about, but I'm also really keen to hear, from the representatives here around what lived experiences have been. Crime statistics are really important, but also we've got to be realistic. There's lived experiences in the borough where it doesn't matter if crime has gone up or down. If your lived experience is not good, then that's something that we have to know about and we have to address. So I am looking forward to questions tonight and just to hear some feedback and see what the important things that are out there.
And Deputy Superintendent Blanford.
Yeah, hello. I'm Dean Blanford. I'm the Second Superintendent. I manage, we now call local investigations. So for many of you may know it more, the almost criminal investigation departments or the teams of detectives that manage the more complex investigations. What I also manage on top of that is the robbery and burglary teams, which I'm sure will be close to many of yourselves. And on top of that, I then manage our proactive assets across the BCU, which is where we use officers specifically to go and preempt crimes taking place at the target those offenders who are very prolific on the borough. So those units are actually based in Kensington Police Station, so very close to yourselves. So I'm sure the areas that I've just mentioned that I cover will come up as well. Well, I think I'll take questions as we go through on those areas.
Thank you. And so if I just explain to everybody, I'll ask members of the committee to ask questions first, and I'll ask councillors who are sitting in the, any other councillors who are here, and then members of the public. So everyone will get a chance to provide questions. That's just the order reserved to. So why don't I start with Councillor Hudson?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. What I would ask is, well, I've got 3 questions. When can I confidently tell the residents of my ward that their thefts of bicycles and scooters and motorbikes will actually be properly investigated with some concrete results besides just being given a sort of police reference number, because that's a constant complaint, and besides not being able to get hold of anyone. My second question is about the Parks Police and Superintendent Fernandon. I'm sorry to repeat myself, but
That's all right. It's okay.
as we've been informed that the Royal Parks, especially Ken Gardens and Hyde Park, will lose 44 police officers. So will all these police officers be, integrated within the current neighbourhood team or police officers? And the extra workload that it will, have for the existing police force to monitor the parks. And I think not having any police presence all the time within the parks where there's very high footfall is pretty detrimental to not just the local community, but also to the tourists. Because police presence is always, very important. And my final question would be, where do we stand on the Notting Hill police station? Thank you.
So it's probably beneficial that I covered it with 2 out of 3, all 3 possibly. So on the borough in the last 10 months, there's about 21,000 offences in the borough. And I think it does come down to capacity and capability. I think we have to be really honest about whether we can investigate those kind of offences to the degree potentially some people might expect. So I think it would be unrealistic of me to sit here and say we will investigate every single bike theft, for example. But there are basics that we should be doing. So there are basics that we could do around CCTV, and those questions should be getting asked at point of report. But at some point, there are difficult decisions to be made around what we prioritise and what we actually look at. That's not to say that it goes unrecorded and all feeds into a bigger picture. So it's not a wasted report. And lots of community meetings that I go to, I will say to people, I do want you to report it because it does feed into the bigger puzzle. Yes, we might not investigate that one offence to the degree potentially that it could be because we don't have the capacity, but it's all part of the bigger picture. One of the things that we are about to roll out, which I've just opened a training for today, is Men Engage, which is a new platform for us for engagement. It's been used in other parts of the country really well, and that is about us being more effective in how we communicate with people. So a good example of that is going to be that if you are signed up to it, and we're going to do a big push to sign people up, you can register on that system, whether you have a Ring doorbell, whether you have your own private CCTV, and then that gives the officers the opportunity to actually directly contact that person without having to go out and knock on their door. Real efficiencies that will actually make it better and quicker and easier for people to help us, because actually my experience on the borough is lots of people want to help us. So these kind of things, so we are doing work to make it more efficient, but I think it would be unrealistic for me to say that we would promise people that we'd investigate every crime. It's just not going to happen. But what we do, and I work with my partners at the council, is we take all the crime data every month, look at what the trends are, and then we decide where our resources go. These kind of offences do feed into that data. So we do look at where our hotspots are and where they're emerging, because theft of a bicycle can often be linked to antisocial behaviour, drug use. We know they're all interlinked together, so they all do get kind of tossed in. So it's not a wasted report.
I can come in on.
Yeah.
So I think I'll trim over carefully. I think obviously I've mentioned I manage more complex investigation in the CID department, and there are other offences what we term as volume crimes that perhaps are slightly more minor in nature, but still can have a big impact on people who are concerned about it. And I think across the Met we've realised we don't always give the service, the victims of those crimes, the level of service they probably do need. So we're looking at the way we structure our teams, and I will be taking over the teams out and manage those, what better word, more minor crimes that will be coming into the CRD department, the local investigations department as well. What we're looking at doing is how we prioritise and identify where we can have an impact on those crimes. If somebody, for instance, realises their phone was stolen at some point in the day, some point during High Street Kensington. There's probably very little we can do to trace that or find out that. We do work where the phone has gone or where the bike has gone. But if we've got more identified parameters and narrow parameters, which looking at how we identify what those are and flag those investigations up so they can go to detectives or to officers who are trained to become detectives, so we can focus on the ones where we can have an impact. So that restructuring has taken place not only on this borough and this BCU in the last 6 weeks, 2 months, but across the Met. So hopefully, when we speak again, there'll be an improvement on the level of service people are getting to these types of crimes.
Parks Police. I'll be quick, Chair. I know.
Yes.
So I'll be short. Parks Police. So yes, it was a really difficult decision to close the department, and it's one of the first closures, first big changes that we're making under what we're calling tough choices because of our financial situation. It is not lost on me. You go from 77 officers to a smaller contingent of officers. There is going to be a change in what that operating model and what that looks like. What's the look and feel? But there are key things that we are working on that I think are important. Number one, going back to our original point, is relationships with Royal Parks. So as our partners, I have a meeting next week with our Royal Parks partners with, instead of that one superintendent, which is me speaking to them, there's going to be 3 superintendents in that room. And that's around changing the mindset across the Met around Royal Parks. So Kensington Gardens, Brompton Cemetery, traditionally on the borough, that would be a Parks Police role. Well, actually, neighbours now have got to start thinking about that, and we start to bring neighbours into that, bring parks into the neighbourhoods, into that family. There is a small uplift, about 14 officers that will be dedicated to neighbourhood policing around the central London parks, which is ultimately, when you look at the data, that is where all the demand sits. Kensington Gardens and Brompton Cemetery are very low down in the crime data. I appreciate there's an argument around visibility disrupting that, but Hyde Park and some of the more central parks are much bigger in demand. So there's an uplift to help the neighbours to address that. And one of the things we're also looking at is actually, again, back to mindset, giving all the officers in the Met the detail and the knowledge around Royal Parks regulations, because they're quite specific. So actually, when officers are working in these areas and they're not based here and they're coming up here for a protest or whatever it might be, they actually know about the regulations, can use them. So everybody starts thinking about Royal Parks rather than just the parks teams, for example. So I'm an optimist. I do think we will get there. There's a lot of work to be done, but it's been a really difficult decision to make. Notting Hill Police Station. So the estate strategy, I believe, is just being finalised at the minute. I think I said that last year, but it is being finalised. I think because there's financial implications in it. The estate is run by Mopac. It's not our decision locally whether we keep it or not. But I've been told the estate strategy is being finalised currently.
Thank you. And just to say, thank you all very much, and Owen, you do a sterling job, so we're delighted you're staying on. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well,
I very much welcome Owen's commitment and continuing commitment. And this mention of working with bids, and there's a new chap on the block called CID. It's not CID. It's Community Improvement District or area. And that is something that's going to be emerging around bids in one area, 1 or 2 areas currently. That it's going to be a new. And I think it worked really well with state neighbourhoods teams and groups as well. Obviously, with being councillor in Chelsea, I've been witness to 4 wards getting together.
Yes.
That's been a mentioned as well. The question though is, what opportunity is there in practice over the next 1 to 2 years to engage communities locally as Peel's police to provide mobile ring data and CCTV and ring bell? Now, you did mention the fact that there's going to be a database which I understand there's also a parallel exercise to that where local people are, I think it's at Shawcross Street, just south of Kingsford Road, in conjunction with Kingsford Partnership, they're looking at pooling the ring data for a whole street so that they can provide a more clever model to that. So I think would that be something that we examine and look at in practice elsewhere?
Yeah, so I don't know the detail on that, but I'll take it away and have a look at it, and I'll speak to Tyler to kind of find the detail behind it. I think there's huge opportunities in what we're doing with the Met Engage model. Will give you the opportunity to not only know, so funny enough, Dean and I were talking about it on the walk here, about the ability to know that just one street across there's a burglary, we'll be able to reach people and tell them that and ask them if they've got the CCTV. I think will really help people to understand what's going on around the streets. I think some streets are very good, aren't they? WhatsApp groups and things like that, but actually there's opportunities for people to help us. And I think that will give us that opportunity because we can do it very quickly and also people can then send us the images.
Yes.
So efficiency wise, I think that will transform the way we work.
So you'd be open to co-working and developing that model?
Yeah, I think it will all form part of our work around what we do. And for Dean's cases that are at the higher end of seriousness, I think it would be fantastic for his teams as well.
Okay. My second question and the last question is to do with children's strategy. What is meant by early interventions? Because that phrase has different meanings in schools and in other sectors. And the question is whether it's aimed at providing a child with, as they grow into an adult, with the experience and resilience to be equipped to thrive as they become 18 and over, the finance industry. And is there opportunities for further partnership working between the police on this and with other bodies such as schools and out of school voluntary sector bodies?
So in terms of the early interventions, the fundamental of the children's strategy is that child first approach. So I think it's about examining opportunities to prevent criminalisation of children effectively. But it's very broad, the strategy in terms of what it covers.
What age does that run from?
So it's under 18 effectively. It's children. Children for us is under 18.
But you start at sort of 2 or 11 or 16 or whatever.
But I think it's where the opportunities present themselves. It's not necessarily dependent on age. So an example would be if we go to a household that is suffering from domestic abuse and there's a child present, it's about the officers recognising there's a child there and putting on the necessary safeguarding reports. That's an example of potential intervention. But you're right around our links with schools. So you will be aware of the links around schools, officer changes at the moment, but our focus is actually shifting away from not losing relationships with schools. And I go to the head teachers' meetings to speak to them, but actually to make sure that officers are in the places where they can actually conduct the interventions. So outside of school, I would say that schools should be looking at safeguarding. You mentioned the interpretation of what safeguarding would be in a school. But actually, for a policing side, actually, I want the officers to be outside the school on that corridor between school and home. What's our intervention points there? Can we do things that will, if we stop and search someone, for example, and take a knife away from that young person, well, that's the intervention, isn't it? But then we need to have the link in around statutory partners. What's the causes? And it's about the broader rather than just a criminal justice process. That kind of makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joanna.
You talk in the report about one-stop shops. Can I understand how often they're held, where they're held, and the convenience and the turnout, and if you're then looking at expanding them further?
Yeah. So the one-stop shops were an idea we came to because we were getting anecdotal feedback that essentially somebody might come to a police station with antisocial behaviour and be told it's a council issue. And then potentially someone would go to the council and be told it's a police issue. And then you have people actually kind of very frustrated and feel that nobody's really solving their problem. So the idea was, and my mantra is always that with the local authority, we should always be shoulder to shoulder in what we're doing. The public expect that. And I work really closely with the teams there. And that was all part of, this is an opportunity for somebody to come in and speak to both the council and the police together to get their problem listened to and solved. So at the moment we run them in North Kensington. At the moment they were sitting weekly. We've adjusted the times on that because the footfall was generally in the afternoon, not in the morning. So we've adjusted the times. But we've had some really good results from that, including residents bringing problems around noise and antisocial behaviour that's resulted in closure orders and arrests, for example. So it does work.
And how are you advertising them?
So they've been advertised through our current social media channels and through our kind of local walls teams as well, and the officers know to talk to people about them as well.
Are you going to roll them out?
So we want to see the effectiveness properly. So we're also doing in the World's End Estate and also at Earls Court as well. But I think what I don't want to do, and we discussed this with the council, is just because I might think it's a good idea that we just do it. We need to. It's a lot of resource and time, and we need to just be careful in doing it the right way. And it's what people want. But in North Kensington in particular, the results have been very good. I think to a certain extent, advertising it is great, but actually a lot of it is word of mouth locally. When people know they get their problems solved, when there's people there willing to listen, it will help.
Can I ask about Nottingham Gate? So Nottingham Gate does not sit in a bid, and it's across 2 wards. What sort of attention can you give to that? Because the shoplifting up there is intense. The shops are not bothering to report it. They don't want to spend the day in court, and it's just a prolific issue, whether it's on the main road or on the side street. But because it's not a bid, I'm very worried that it doesn't get the same attention, and because it's split across 2 wards.
Yeah, so the ward teams they're actually based in the same building and they work really closely together. So we talk a lot about ward boundaries, but actually the ward teams are very close. That's one of the things that I've been really keen on in my teams, is that they collaborate together. Chelsea's a good example of that, where we're trialing that kind of 4 ward model together to see if they can jointly work on each other's issues. I'm conscious of public meetings, so I won't reference specific retailers, but we've been doing some work with some specific retailers that haven't been reporting to encourage reporting. And there's particular individuals that are having issues that the teams are now working on to get criminal behaviour orders against, and actually do the work to get the evidence to do that. So I know it is happening in Nottingham Gate. Just because it doesn't have a bid doesn't mean that we don't still focus on it and still work on it. The ward teams still have their local ward objectives that we still need to work to.
Thank you. Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Owen, for staying on. It's good to have that continuity. So I've got 2 real questions. The first one is on cybercrime, and the second one is on what Councillor Hudd said in terms of sort of reporting and activating low-level crime. So the council's quite pushing towards having more interaction with council services electronically, and there is quite a lot of cybercrime happening with people clicking on the wrong links and so on. I couldn't see any detail about what you're doing in this area in particular in relation to helping people go up the ladder of learning and understanding not to click on the wrong links, and how cybercrime is being tackled specifically within the borough. So I'd like to hear a bit about what you're doing there.
So if I'm really honest, I think cybercrime is not on the neighbourhood. It's just not in my not on my radar. I'm over policing. I think we're very street focused, aren't we? And I think that's probably a point I need to reflect on. But I do know that in our general crime prevention advice, we do talk about fraud. So an example of that is I know the ward teams have been in the over 50s forum, talk about cybercrime, general crime prevention advice, which includes fraud, which is what cybercrime would sit under. So cybercrime is an interesting one, because the first question I always get asked is, where are the police? Because I've never seen them. So there's a bit of a balance between the visibility of officers on the street and the investigation of cybercrime. I know nationally, I could talk from a national perspective around cybercrime. There's a huge push nationally around upskilling our abilities in cybercrime. So we are very focused on using our special constabularies, the volunteers in uniform roles. They're actually massively expanding in the cybercrime area, volunteers to help us with cybercrime. Because I think, again, going back to the points around investment, I think we are suffering, the Commissioner said this, we are suffering from years of underinvestment in policing, and I think the cybercrime and our ability to deal with cybercrime and fraud is an effect of that. It's, we've seen the symptom of that, I think, now, because we're focusing on street-based crime. It's not to say it's not important, and it's not saying we don't do crime prevention advice, but the neighbourhood teams are very focused on out on the street work at the moment.
And that also dovetails into what Councillor Pascal said. You've got children using iPhones or using other digital devices. There are grooming gangs that are then targeting through all the usual social media children. So it's obviously quite important that police have got a grip on those 2, in particular, and that's all in that sort of cyber space. And then the final one that I got from residents is, when someone does have their mobile phone device stolen from outside a coffee shop, and then they use locate me to try and track that device, and then they tell the police, I can see where my device is, nothing then happens. And that seems a little bit awkward, because the member of the public has gone home, open up their laptop, and they can identify exactly where it is, yet the police don't do anything. That seems awkward.
And there are instances where that happens, and it's happened probably too regularly. There is a process now in place that the control rooms in the police stations, or the operations room the police stations have. If somebody comes out and they are doing that, but officers will go to detective inspectors straight away to evaluate what we can do around that. They'll make an assessment And we're also hoping that will allow more officers to be deployed rather than members of the public try and go and trace where their devices are themselves. This has been in for, I think, about 6 weeks, the new policy. So we're yet to see what dividends it's going to have. But it's frustrating for us as well when we find out that where devices are going to certain places and we are seeing certain areas that devices go to more than other areas. Then so a big focus myself outside that is now not just the ones who steal those devices, but trying to find out what's happening behind them, and not just the initial handling some of the goods addresses. But this is obviously far more organised, and there are overseas connections, this I would say, as well, where the phones been seen to be taken out of countries and implications. So we're trying to work out what is driving all this behind rather than just the initial ones who are doing the thefts. We're trying to work out what's going on behind that.
So if a resident does have a device stolen and can actually track it, obviously we tell the residents to report it. But when they do report it, are you saying that you won't actually go and actually try and retrieve that stolen device, even though they can identify exactly where it is?
We will now look to go and identify. Yeah, we'll now look to go and find that.
So that's current policy. You're going to deploy officers and go and actually. Okay.
Yeah.
There are challenges. If it's a block of flats, I've got to speak on an iPhone user. It pings to a block. It's got 200 flats. Which door do you knock on? That's the challenge we have, is narrowing down who the most likely suspect is going to be. What legislation we've got to rely on knocking on every door. We don't have powers to search every property, and that's where the challenge comes. And often, when individuals are targeted, the suspects know what they're doing and they will stop us being able to identify those phones. So that's the ongoing challenge. But in the prevention space, we have had 2 weeks of action this year alone, advertising the work we're doing with some victims who then find after their phones have been stolen that their personal data is also stolen. So the harvesting of personal information has become an issue for us. And that's where we're using Action Fraud, City of London and our business partners to work with members of the public to spread that knowledge. They can take action on their phones to make it harder to do that, i.e. making sure your app has a different part, your banking apps have a different password to your phone, or having two-factor authentication on, so that actually even if your phone is logged into, they can't get your money out without additional safeguards in place.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much for coming, and please also pass on our thanks to your officers for the work they're doing. It's much appreciated. And also I want to recognise the achievements that you set out at the beginning and the achievements in your report. And I don't want to detract from any of those. But if I were to knock on 100 doors in my ward, there's one issue that you haven't mentioned that comes up many times, and it's the multifaceted cycling crime, and it comes in many forms. So, for example, illegal bikes. So they're actually motorbikes. They look like bicycles, bombing up and down Northampton Road with delivery riders. They should have registration plates and insurance. That's the kind of speed they're travelling at. Nothing seems to be done about those. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got more ordinary riders, if I could put it, the commuters, the wannabe Bradley Wiggins going through the traffic lights, disobeying the highway code. Cyclists riding on the pavements. I got hit by a cyclist in Gloucester Road on a pavement, riding straight towards me on a pavement last week. I mean, I know I didn't get out of his way, but it resulted in a collision. I mean, this kind of thing's happening day after day after day, and residents mention it. If they say one thing about crime, that's the one they tend to bring up. And it doesn't seem to feature on your list of priorities. I realise it's low level compared with some of the gang crime we have and some of the more serious things that you've described. But it is the broken window syndrome, and if you're not doing something about these things, society starts to break down. So I wonder if you could reflect on that first of all, and then perhaps have a think about doing something about it in the next year, please.
Yes, Councillor, thank you, and thank you for your comments. This was raised at last year's committee. When I left, I picked up the phone to my peer who leads the Roads and Transport Command and said we need to do more in this space because this is the feedback we're getting from communities. And actually, there have been several operations on the borough since, targeting and particularly e-bikes, which we've seen since the lockdown really a much higher number of users on the roads are using. We worked in partnership with TfL to roll out some training to delivery drivers particularly fast food outlets who've been doing a lot of just to get to where they need to quickly, haven't always abided by highway code and traffic law, and that has seen a marked reduction in the last year in the amount of accidents we're seeing in that space, but also the number of illegally adapted bikes where people are buying batteries and putting them onto bikes to make them go faster. We've also spent some time with Junior Assistance Scheme, and we've trained over 20,000 year sixes on cycle safety to try and embed that kind of better road usage earlier on in our community, so that behaviour is designed out. And we've been working with trading standards and London Fire Brigade because they have seen an increase in house fires with lithium batteries. And so, again, trying to educate communities on how dangerous illegally adapted bikes can be. In terms of enforcement, we've had over 1,500 individuals who have had their bikes seized and prosecuted for various road traffic offences as a result of illegal bikes. And all teams have had some training after the last years. It's not enough, but in terms of priorities, we are juggling a lot, and we recognise that this is an area that is going to continue to increase. So we are working more and more closely with our safe transport and road policing teams to be able to deliver exactly on the reasons you've already outlined. And I hope you weren't too badly injured.
Well, thank you very much for your answer, Chief Superintendent. I'm not satisfied that you're doing enough on the subject. I mean, I welcome that you're doing something, and that you took some action last year. And I know there have been some operations, so I don't want to distract them. I don't want to say you've been doing nothing over the last year, because I know you've done something. But the residents are still talking about it, and I still see the evidence of the problems going on. So I think if you need to do more to build up confidence on this matter, and I will leave that hanging as a comment, and allow the chair to move on to somebody else, unless you want to come back.
Just what would you like to see? We're not going to be able to enforce our way out of this, so it's very much going to happen with the education and prevention. But if you've got any ideas, I would love to hear them.
Well, I would like to see some enforcement. I'd like to see some physical enforcement. I appreciate you can't go on every set of traffic lights every day, and that actually is probably what you need to do. We haven't got the resources to do that as a state, but I think a lot more visible operations at sets of traffic lights and stopping every bike that goes through them, watching out the pavements, and to do more visible operations at various points around the borough. And there's plenty of places in the borough where you could do it. The point where I was hitting Gloucester Road probably isn't one of them. It was a very quiet spot, but other bits of Gloucester Road would be an example, or Brompton Road for the bikes, and every ward in the borough has probably got this issue, and every councillor could probably mention a road or two that is a key one for you.
Thank you, Lucy.
Firstly, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for the reports and for all the work that you do. I had lots of questions, but I actually want to ask one, and it's completely changed the route I wanted to go. And I've spoken to officers about this before, but not to you. But I just wanted to understand, when a crime happens on a street or in a particular neighbourhood, say also repeatedly in North Kent the last year, we've had some quite serious crimes. What is your strategy about speaking to neighbours and sort of affected roads when, say, for example, a road gets closed off due to a stabbing or a shooting? How are you communicating with those residents? Because there's one thing, me being kind of nosy Parker, being a counsellor and trying to find out, but from my experience, we've had something else in Holland that's happened like this. I don't think enough work is being done on the doorstep to reassure people, because you have families, you have people who have no idea of the extent of what the crime is, who the attackers were, who the victims were, and I think it creates a real sense of anxiety if it's not communicated in the right way. And I don't know what your strategy is on that, but I'd love to hear about it. And I just feel, from my experience, it's not being done in a very effective way.
Thank you, Lucy.
I'll come down and said I think they're really valid points. So I won't reference specific cases because I don't think it's appropriate. But after one case in particular, the neighbourhood teams did a community pop-up. So they were there in the area with our colleagues from the local authority. And we had the mother of a juvenile murder victim in another part of London come up and said, I wish I'd had this in London when it happened to my son. And the murder teams have also said this is the best post-incident engagement they've seen in London. It's not perfect. but it shows that I think we're doing the right things.
Yeah.
But I think it feeds back a little bit to my point around engage. I think it will give us the opportunity to get people signed up to get those messages. You can do it down to street level, which would be really important for us. But I'm conscious we shouldn't be emailing people updates all the time. They need to see people and speak to people. My biggest worry, and I've said this after some of the serious events we've had in North Kensington, is when the crime scene is up, there's lots of officers to talk to. And if you're worried, go and speak to them. As soon as it comes down, it feels very empty. And suddenly where's the police presence? So we've really focused over the last few years about actually, can we make sure that we maintain a visible presence in the area as long as we can, based on demand. One of the things that we are now doing is with colleagues in local authority, developing our critical incident policy. So what is our strategy to get the local authority? So, for example, we might do leaflet drops for appeals. What does that actually look like? So we can actually do it far quicker. So what we're doing is, in a time of kind of relative calm, is actually getting that strategy nailed down with the local authority, because again, it should be shoulder to shoulder. And not all the issues are policing issues in a local area. It can be on social behaviour, it can be all sorts of things. So actually, we get that policy nailed down. And I think we're almost there now with what it will look like, because it will give us the ability to very quickly step up engagement, what it will look like post-event. So generally, after a serious event, Dean's teams would be doing door-to-door inquiries anyway. So we'll be knocking on doors. Again, that's when the crime scene's up. As soon as it comes down, that's when I want actually really to fill that bit. And we need to step up a bit more and talk to people about what the ongoing result is.
And sorry, Mary, what's the kind of time span? Are you doing door-to-door knocking if that is a attempted stabbing, or when someone is, how bad does that have to be? Because I think the one difference here is someone can see their whole road closed down, and it could be an attempted stabbing and they're absolutely fine, but they still have that sense of anxiety of not understanding what it is. Whereas you might only, I don't know, be going down that strategy route of saying we need to go knock on doors because someone's died here. Whereas someone could be looking at from their window and watching that, and the sort of state of anxiety that creates about walking home at night, or are their children safe, when actually it was something that was resolved quite quickly and maybe isn't the top priority to go to be talking. I think that's my only query to you to think about, is it doesn't need to be a serious crime to create a sense of anxiety in a neighbourhood, where I just think there could be a bit more comms.
Yeah, I think there's almost two bits to that. So if there is an act of violence against somebody, there will be door-to-door inquiries after that, regardless of the severity of the scale of things. And obviously, it could be my teams, it could be murder investigation teams that deploy, and we will do the inquiries for as long as they need to take place, and we will hold a crime scene for as long as it needs to take place until we've done what we need to, which again can cause issues for the community for that. There's then the second piece, which is the engagement. I think this is probably more to rather than witness things.
Yeah, I think it's like I said, I think it's a really valid point actually that I need to take away and think about. I do think the work we're doing is going to bridge that, but I think you're right. If you sit just underneath that, what's it look like? And when the officers are doing inquiries, we might not know the outcome for the victim who might still be in hospital. So do we follow up afterwards with what the update was?
And I think with that too,
thank you. But I'm going to do that in a summary up.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions which I will go through as quickly as I can, Chair. So first of all, I was wondering about Operation Northley, and there's an update from last September, I think, that was put out. We used to have quite a lot of engagement for the community from that, and I was wondering is there likely to be any more of that happening soon, and could we perhaps have more regular updates for the community on that one? I wanted to ask as well about Royalty Studios in Notting Hill Ward, Smile Ward. Can we have some assurance that that will be a stable presence going forwards, and that we don't have anxiety about it every year, potentially losing it, because it's really important to my constituents. And I wanted to ask very quickly as well, in light of the some of the behaviours that have been documented towards family justice campaigns at the ongoing public inquiry into undercover policing, I wondered, could we have an assurance that those behaviours haven't been and aren't being employed in Kensington and Chelsea and in particular to the community?
Thank you. 3 succinct questions.
So I think I can address these too. So up Northley, I will send that feedback back to Superintendent Moncrief, who's leading the North investigation. It deliberately sits away from Borough Police. So I'll feed that back. But I know there has been engagement work with, but if it's not quite landing properly, then I'll make sure that gets fed back. Royalty Studios. So I know it was a very difficult decision to close it briefly, which I know we did everything we could to hopefully keep it open, but it's just not safe to do so. And if it puts the public at risk as well as my teams, there's absolutely no way we can keep it open. Out of our control, unfortunately, because it's not our building as such. As far as I'm aware, there is no intention to close Royalty Studios, or I've not been. That's nothing that's been briefed to me. But what I can't sit here and say, with the financial challenges, this is what the future will definitely look like. I think it would be naive for me to sit there and say that. But what I can tell you is that it's not at risk currently.
Thank you. The last point.
I think I'll cover that one if I can. So the public inquiry you referred to when they cover policing, obviously looks back historically over a tremendously long period of time. The vast majority of those cases and those relationships and engagements happened before the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act was in place. What that now requires us to do when we put any covert authorities in for undercover or covert activity, it requires a superintendent to authorise that activity taking place. So somebody of my or which rank the application will come to, we have to look through the proportionality of it. What crime are they actually looking to address by the activity? And that is a very detailed aspect. It needs to be a serious level of crime that we're looking at. Is the activity they'd look to do covertly going to address that? And is it proportionate to do that? Is it legal? Do we have legal power to be doing that? And is it necessary for us to do that? Are there any least intrusive ways we could do that? So there is a high degree of scrutiny that it goes through. So it would go through the applicant, an inspector, the superintendent to look through for what we call directed surveillance to take place. And it would look at basically the proportionality of it. And is that the only way we can get what we want to do by that? It is a process that takes a lot of time. Then all the records are kept and inspected independently by IPCO at least once every 12 months. So I would say that the degree of oversight that takes place now is far different than what would be for the vast majority of those cases.
Thank you. I mean, I just come back on that one just very quickly. I'm not aware that, for instance, the Stephen Lawrence family was surveilled because of a crime. So the Family Justice Campaign is specifically what I'm asking for, because I think it's quite clear that those types of surveillance were not proportionate at all, and indeed were not appropriate. And the then chief of the Met Police has in fact apologised for quite a lot of it. The terms of that inquiry exclude that they don't go up to 2017. And that's why what's being exposed and discussed there is really concerning. I think we need to have an assurance that, particularly in the context of Kensington, Chelsea and Grenfell in particular, that those behaviours are not ongoing.
Like you're saying, with PC Commander, I'm on many investigations of that sort. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Batcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to tap on CCTVs and trust. I come across many residents in the past 10, 11 years telling me, giving me intel, they don't want to give it to the police. And for a variety of reasons, I could understand why. I don't want to go into that. But the way around it I see is through CCTV. And I explored this idea a few years ago back. But I didn't see any interest from the police. So we have three types of CCTVs. We have police CCTV, it's easy for you to use anytime, and council CCTVs. But the third one is private CCTVs, which need to be explored to use as a preventative measure. You know that very well. And at the same time, evidence, because instead of door knocking, if you have a network of CCTVs, volunteers want to join this network of private CCTVs, you don't need to ask many questions. You will have everything you need on there. Especially now, the technology is advancing and all the data could be stored somewhere very easily. I think it's time to explore this because London isn't safe, the borough isn't safe. stabbing is everywhere. You are worried about your mobile, your safety, your watch, and everything. So I would like to share whenever you have time. I'm happy to share this with you. I think the health option combination of these three will benefit the community and policing very much.
I'll be quick. So I agree with you. CCTV is really important. Predominantly, the CCTV on the borough is local authority owned, but we do really close work with the local authorities around CCTV tasking. So we task specific CCTV activity in conjunction with some of our crime issues that have happened. So that does happen. It feeds into my earlier point around providing that ability to know people who have private CCTV and giving the opportunity to give it to us really easily. Most Ring doorbells or other providers, it's stored on the cloud, isn't it, or it's stored remotely. We now have moved away from having officers having to go and burn a disk with it on. They can actually log in online and upload it to us on the cloud, and that's evidentially sound, so it can be used at court. I think we've come on a bit of a journey over the last year or so around CCTV. With facial imaging, our technological advances are actually quite significant. So we can use images of people who are involved in crime, search that through all sorts of different systems, but we can also encourage our officers to go and look and identify specific suspects. So I'll be quick. I gave Officer of the Month last month was one of my PCSOs because he looked at that system and identified 2 robbery suspects just from CCTV images. It is happening, and that's one of my PCSOs on the neighbourhood team. They are all looking because it is nothing better, I can tell you from experience, of identifying someone on CCTV and knowing who it is. It's a really good thing. So it does happen. It does.
Thank
Yes,
you.
may I follow up with the question?
Quickly, yep.
I represent Colville, which Portobello Market is one of them. I'm a member of a group of businesses in there, and I get daily updates of tens of shoplifters, and they are coming back time after time after time after time, and no action is taken. And the police are present in the group. So what's wrong? People need to understand this.
Yeah, I think it's something we maybe take away from the meeting, and we can follow up afterwards, and I'll make sure that we're linked in locally, I think. Yeah.
Maybe if you would email.
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. I'm going to open it up to councillors in the audience. If anybody, councillors in the audience, want to ask a question.
If I may,
Yes.
and this refers to an item which is later on in the agenda, but I'm assuming that you're going to leave. So recently, me and my colleague Linda Wade and Joanna Gardner had a working group into hostels in the borough, and we asked the police, through Stuart Priestley, who is sitting behind me, if we could have information, data on arrests, incidents of ASB, etc. And we were told, because we wanted to be able to map that data onto where our hostels were, and we were told that you didn't have time to analyse the data, and we didn't need you to analyse the data. We just wanted to have it so that we could make some assumptions or whatever, because there are many residents who attribute ASB, and this again, Earl's call to action is coming up. A lot of people attribute it to the hostels, and so we wanted to do this. So my question is, can you in future, will you be able to provide us with this data? I mean, we don't want names, we don't want exact addresses, we just want, an indication of where the activity is.
So, okay, so I'm going to stay to the Earl's Court paper, by the way, so I'll still be here, so I can answer more of the questions. So, analytical support is quite challenging at the moment in the Met. Generally, we are short on analysts, so we don't have a lot of analytical support. I appreciate the point around you don't want us to analyse the data.
We just wanted it, so
yes,
we could analyse it.
So, but there's a challenge there because, so for example, if we had a domestic abuse case in a hostel, should we be sharing that information? And how do we tease out the specifics of the crime data without analysing what that is? Or if something happens outside a hostel, right outside, but there's no link to it whatsoever. So there is a necessity to cleanse that data, which does take time, unfortunately.
Yeah, but as I was saying, we were not thinking, here is the causal arrow. We were just trying to see that the assertions that people make to us whether there was any truth in them or not. And, domestics in hostels, don't think they happen very often,
I think we have to be careful about making
I
assumptions
think
around.
probably not a
sample
discussion to
size.
have in
Yeah.
this
Okay.
meeting, but it's a valid question, and maybe you could take it up outside the meeting. I mean, this whole issue of data and
Sorry, Kate. Police.uk. You go in there and put in either postcode or the area. I've just done it while we've been speaking, and it's brought up Earls Court and shows me the crimes that have happened in that area.
okay, thank you. So now I open it up to questions. Oh, sorry, Linda, did you want to ask a quick question?
Adding on to this, I think what was relevant to what Marie-Therese was saying is we were looking into data specifically into shoplifting, which isn't revealed in the figures that you find. So that's one thing. I'm going to come back to my pet subject, which is why do the police not comment on licensing? Because the licensing and planning can influence how a high street performs. And we know that we have a series of applications in the Earls Court ward, quite a high level of fast food going for 5 a.m. licenses. We know that we
That's a clear
can't marry
question.
up.
Why don't you comment on licensing?
Well, no, we can't marry up. Why? We don't have police at the time that we have the extensions, and we have a PSBO which is supposed to be proactive.
Who'd like to respond to that one?
I didn't comment. I've been to hearings. But I will say that we have over 5,000 licensed premises on the BCU, which does make it challenging for this very small team that we've got to manage that.
You have a very soft voice.
I'm so sorry. So we do challenge some license applications, and we do go to hearings and make representations. But the number
I'd like to know how many you've challenged, because I haven't seen very many.
I won't be able to tell you today, but we can definitely find out for you.
Thank you. I think I've plumbed the council of questions. What about members of the public? Do I have members of the public who want to ask questions? I'm going to work from that side to that side, if that's all right. Gentleman here.
Mary.
You introduce yourself if you like. And yeah, I'm going to work all the way around like that.
Okay. My name's Wilson. I live in Goldwyn Ward. In the 3 years or so that I've lived in that area, there has been significant antisocial behaviour of the same individuals time and time and time again. We have identified these individuals. We know who they are. We know their parents aren't parents. We know that they're victims as much as perpetrators. Is it not time for us to say these group of individuals are causing such unrest that they need to be moved out of the area for the sake of everybody else?
Who'd like to respond to that one? Oh, sorry. I thought that was the question.
When is it that the police go, well, you know what, we don't really want to look at that, but there's nothing else. We've got no other tools. Because what I'm seeing is that tools are being thrown with the prevention of locking them up, which is the two options that you guys have. Have you got anything else, or is there anything else that you guys could do? Because I know you've lost your school officers and turned them into youth officers. As back in my day when I was growing up, we had policeman Pat. He used to ride around in a bike. He lived opposite the park, and he made 4 arrests that everybody knew of, sitting on his toilet. But he was a local bobby. Is it not time you go back to having new local bobbies doing what local bobbies used to do?
Thank you. I think that's 2 questions there.
So the first bit, I don't want to make any assumptions about the individuals involved. What I would say is I'll be really keen to follow it up and get the specifics around it, because if the police teams, if it's not quite working, then let us know and we'll work on that. In conjunction with our partners. In terms of moving residents, we don't have the powers as the police to move people on. We don't have the powers to move residents. That would potentially be discussed something through a local authority, depending on who they are. But we wouldn't really do that around moving families. That's not really policing responsibility. But I understand your thinking.
It's not moving the family, it is moving the perpetrators from unsolicited. Because there seems to be an onus or they're there. Never mind, I know you've had a hard life. You're causing us a hard life. What the community, I think, needs is, and I hate using it, but the time's rolled us policing. They're not listening. They've got no respect for you as police officers. At some point, you've got to say, enough's enough. We've been going down this road for 3 years. How much longer?
Yeah, so I can sense the frustration that you have. One of the things that we've done is we've really worked hard with our housing providers on the borough to actually get down in writing what are the responsibilities of each organisation. And I do think there's an opportunity for housing providers to do more around problem solving, dealing with issues where there's residents that are causing issues. I believe there's a chance for earlier intervention to prevent this from happening, which is why we've done it. It's taken a lot of work, to be honest, for my teams to do it. But now, and some of the areas that is in that document is around how we share information, problem solving, communications, referrals into other agencies. So this work is happening. What I would say is, and I spoke earlier about what community one-stop shops. These are sort of things that I really want brought to these one-stop shops. So you sit with my officers, you sit with council officers, you sit with the street enforcement team who have had social behaviour powers, and you can actually bring that to their table and they will look at that together to see if there's options to do it. And it's not necessarily policing. Robust policing isn't always the answer. You might move the problem, but actually there's more nuanced powers. We can do closure orders, but we need the evidence to do that. So I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. I think you just need more information to come through, and then I'm really hopeful we would deal with things like that.
Thank you, and perhaps a little bit of conversation afterwards, not necessarily after this meeting, but via email or something, be your particular
yeah, I'm keen to know what it is. Yeah.
Don't think you wanted to ask a question, but I think the next gentleman did.
Thank you. I'm Kieran Terry. I'm a resident in Earls Court, and what the member here was saying. She's taken. I agree very much with what she said. Also, to take a slightly different twist on it. In Earls Court, we have a number of hostels, and sadly, what you get are people like drug dealers who want to prey on the vulnerable residents, and that in itself is a sort of, magnet. Because basically there is a drug dealer there, so the people who are vulnerable and potentially have addiction issues then come towards where, that is. And I think I would like to see what the police would do in terms of that, because I think these are some of the lowest of the low criminals really who are really preying on very vulnerable people with significant problems. Just to a slightly different point as well, I'd like to know what you're doing to support our officers. There's a lot of very high profile cases in the media at the moment where, some officers who are literally running into very difficult, very dangerous scenes to protect us as members of the public, are getting the book thrown at them, are getting named in public. There's all sorts of risks they're being exposed to. And I want to know what the leadership in terms of the police is doing to protect those officers who are dealing with very difficult subjects, who are actually seeing this happen in the media, think twice about doing what they need to do to keep us safe.
Thank you. You'd like to respond to that?
I'll cover the first one. So around hostels, so policing doesn't have a say on whether a hostel goes into an area or not. So I would have to say that's not the policing responsibility. I appreciate it's an issue with crime, but it's not a policing responsibility. The local authority would have to be spoken to or not.
Just for doing the issue, the place of the hostels that we can raise perhaps in the next agenda item, but I think for me it's how you are actually keeping the hostel safe for the vulnerable residents, the vulnerable people who are inside.
I agree. So one of the things that I've already referenced our ways of work with the housing providers, which I think is really important. But the other thing is, and this is what I want my teams, and they have been in Earls Court, is focusing on, is using the support of specialist crime teams to actually deal with the people who are bringing the drugs into Earls Court and are driving the demand. So we've carried out 8 drugs warrants in the last 6 weeks in Earls Court. I can see by the surprise on your face, didn't know about it. That's a failure on our part because we need to get messaging out that we've done this. We did 8 drugs warrants and 10 arrests, followed up by closure orders, close the premises that are causing issues. I really do think, and the team really focused on it, if we reduce demand, we reduce people coming into the area to buy drugs, and that's all linked into the ASB and the other issues and the quality of life in Earls Court. I commute to Earls Court every day, so I completely understand some of the challenges because I see them. But just to reassure you, we are doing that work. We are doing that work around focusing on the crime, the drug supply, and the drug dealers in the area.
I think with those warrants as well, the arrests, there's also around 20 individuals that were referred to drug referral schemes to try and assess. As you said, they are very vulnerable individuals, so try and help them out of the situation as well.
Thank you. The gentleman.
Sorry, just the second part I raised as well.
You may well have heard our commissioner talking about something he referred to as the accountability review, where the issues you raised have been fed back to him by a number of staff about having the confidence to go out and deal with an issue, but also know they're going to be supported when they come back into the station. So it is very much recognised. And over the last year or so, we've been working with both CPS to change the criteria by which issues will be automatically referred, the IOPC, sorry, to readdress the automatic referral to the CPS for criminal cases. Also looking at training internally, both in how to make sure the evidence is presented in a way that we can see the whole issue as early as possible, and also looking at how we work with some community members, particularly around our community monitoring groups and access to body-worn video, just to show the other side of policing, in particularly with cases that aren't being to go to court, where we can demonstrate the whole story a lot quicker, so we can show the decision making that went through it, and just help widen the understanding of the pressure that people are under and the short space of time they've got to make decisions. And then, in addition to that, our well-being package for those officers has also improved. So we're doing more to provide them with media support earlier on in the investigations, support them with evidence given at court as well, so they can also paint that picture more clearly for juries and the public as to what they're doing. But it is recognised, and thank you for raising it.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more questions because I said the gentleman in blue and the lady in green, because it's 20 to 8 now, but we've had quite a long time. Did you want to ask a question?
So I'm also from Earls Court. I share the same as what he's been saying. And just to add on, so the police pop-ups that you've done are excellent. I went to the first one, which was a great help, and I met both sides. I went the second time, and then they said, "What are you doing here? This is not for our area." They're saying it's North Kensington only. So there's a bit of confusion with the pop-ups there. Plus the timings were changed and it wasn't updated on the website or the police station. To add on to that, now the figures that you put here, I would challenge those figures based on why is the way you report on the police website. It's extremely difficult. Okay, so you can't upload pictures, you can't upload videos, and it takes a lot of information, unnecessary information, and no one's going to do that. They'll just give up. It's as if it's designed for you to give up. So that's why I would challenge these figures that you're putting here in this report. And the final thing is, so what I would say on top of that is ASB is on the rise in Earls Court, not based on what you're putting here, based on what I can see every day. Now I've noticed a huge decrease recently, probably based on what you've done recently, the last 6 weeks. I've noticed some changes, but it always comes back. A cycle comes through the housing, the associations, and it's a refresh of new people doing the same thing. And I can pinpoint for you if you want to, where they are every day, because I see it. I step out of my house, I see it right in front of me.
Thank you. Lady in green.
Right, I wanted to say, reporting to you guys as a person that has is dyslexic and has multiple sclerosis, it is very difficult to report to you guys, and you do not, under the Equality Act, make any reasonable adjustments for someone to be able to do it other than being on a laptop. And when you're a mum of 4 kids and you've got those, it's virtually impossible. So you can't report stuff. The other thing is, you report something. My son was assaulted by a member of staff at his school. I reported it, and all I got was that he was going to be interviewed an advocate at the age of 6, which is, I've got a forensics background, which is wrong, right? Nothing was done. You guys wanted to drop the case. You didn't care. There's other children involved. Didn't care. They want to look back at the history that there's been other incidences and other things, what does that say to my 6-year-old son? That no one cares about him, because that's what he thinks about the police. So we've gone from his grandfather being a police officer and him wanting to be a police officer to him thinking that the police just don't care. And now when he sees you, he doesn't care. He doesn't want to say hello. He put your uniform in the bin. It's left a lasting effect on us. It drains me. It caused me to have a new lesion on my brain that I've not had in 10 years, because trying to report a serious crime to you, and it might not be serious to you, but a 6-year-old being assaulted is serious. If I had done it, I'd be locked up straight away, because, you know, his mum can't hit him, but and then, you know, like, different person. And the whole system is designed for that. If you're not educated or you don't understand the laws or you've had no training, is to shut you down and not let you do anything and not be able to move, which is wrong, because that's why it looks like there's no crime happening or things aren't happening, and you guys can't do the intelligence gathering and go look and see why these problems are happening. Is because we're trying and we keep getting shut down. All the DC kept telling me was, not to further traumatize my son, the trauma's happened, and further trauma has happened because no one's done anything. He didn't want the person to prosecute or anything. What he wanted is for you guys to go and tell them off, for you guys to listen to him. And then the other thing that sounded like insult to injury is, we lived in Westminster before. We knew all our police officers. We saw them regularly. We've lived in RBKC for 2 years now. The local police, whoever they're meant to be for Delvano, didn't even rock up to the meet and greet that Joe Powell organised, which is just like another joke, because if they can't even bother to rock up to say hey to the residents that live there,
thank you.
It's a joke.
I suggest that we shouldn't discuss the particular case in this meeting. Yeah. But that you've laid your concerns, and I'm sure the officers here have, and we'll take it up with you separately. You've made a really clear point, which I've made myself many times, about how difficult it is to report crimes. So I think we have time for one more. We have one more question at the front there. Because everyone's been so succinct.
The chap actually asked the same question to me. So
I'm going to sum up, because it's a 22. I think there have been a number of particular issues that people have raised today. And I wondered that perhaps next time when you come back, actually you'd reflect them in your report. So, for example, we raised cycling last time. It would have been really nice to see that in the report, even if it was to, you know, read us some harsh realities. And the ones that I particularly picked up are the crime scene strategy, what you've done with that. That's a work in progress now. Really nice to hear next year what you've done about it. Cycling. And as a keen cyclist, I'd also say motor crimes and car speeding, what we're doing about that. The strategy or the attempts to pull together Ringos and private CCTV, also something that's been really interesting. I've got a lot of interest here, so I think it would be really helpful to have that. And also antisocial behaviour would also be nice to see something about that in the next report. I'd also like to make myself an overall point about data. And data in this report, there's quite a lot of sort of quite padded out presented data here, which could have been much more succinct. And there's some missing data. So, for example, when you talk about emergency calls, 82% within the target time, A, you don't say what that time is, and B, you don't give us the distribution, you know, how bad is it when it's bad? You know, when the sort of 3% that are, you know, take over however many minutes. I think if you're going to present data, it's really helpful to have a better, a richer picture. And points that were raised over here about what data you can share with us. It may be helpful in the next report to let us know what the publicly available data sets are, point us in that direction in them. And obviously we've raised questions here about where it would be useful to share more data with us locally about things. I completely understand the effort that goes into anonymising and cleansing data, but perhaps only a pure explanation of why perhaps in Mary Teresa's case that wasn't possible. But overall, thank you enormously for coming tonight. I know I'm staying for the next paper, but it was a really useful evening, I think, for everybody. So thank you very much. We're now going to move over to the next paper, which is the Earls Court Councillor's call to actions that is learned. Which is, and Stuart, you're going to talk to us, aren't you? And Lorna and Bo. Sarah. Thanks.
Really, Anne's she's more involved in the debate than on GP.
I suppose lurking in the background.
These are the cheap seats. I'll just start. I just want to thank everybody who's been involved, who's worked on this report. I think, as we've heard earlier, this is very much about partnership working to address the issues in Earls Court. And I think progress has been made and lessons have been learned, but we acknowledge there is still a lot to do. So we'll be very interested to hear what the committee has to say. I think I just want to add one thing, because it's not all about community safety, that the council has made a very strong commitment to Earls Court with the recent transformation of Hogarth Road. And we're also looking at a potential Earls Court Business Improvement District to enhance the area. So I think, it's not just about community safety. We are looking at Earls Court and seeing what we can do to make it better. So I don't know if Stuart's in here.
No, I think I'm both the same question.
Okay, so I'm going to turn first the committee, then to councillors in the audience, and then to the public. So I'm going to start with that. Mo, did you have any questions to ask?
Thank you. Yes, I think the proof of the pudding in all of this hard work that's been done is, has it made a difference on the ground to the lived experience of the residents? And I see there's a lot of recommendations being implemented. It's excellent. I'm seeing in the crime on page 46. We do have reductions in volume, but we do have an increase in violence against a person. I'd be very interested to hear from the residents and the ward councillors if they feel this has made a difference. And if we don't, then what can we do next? But I'd be interested to see from your point of view, how far do you feel that these have been addressed or are in the process of being addressed?
But I'd start on. I think Clay, you summed up the key test for us. But a significant amount of work has gone into Earls Court from the various council partners and the police and others. And as Sarah said, it's broader than just crime and community safety and policing. And I think what the paper shows is that we've put an awful lot of effort in, and we've learned as we've gone along, we've folded that learning in. There is still more to go. The litmus test is what our residents do. So we can say that crimes have gone down, and we acknowledge that Earls Court's got the highest levels of antisocial behaviour. There are lots of challenges that sit behind recorded crime data, because people get fatigued about reporting and what have you. So it really is the lived experience that we are, that is the litmus test for us. We've received mixed messages around that. We've received some positive feedback, and we've received some feedback that says things haven't changed. We want to learn from all of the voices so that we can shape the future delivery, because it's really important to us that we make Earls Court a safer place to live, and that people feel that.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll keep it brief because we've got those residents in the room, and they've made a number of very good points already. I was quite struck by Councillor Dorian's paper that we got this afternoon, and it's a shame he can't be here to present it, but I know we've got the other two ward councillors. So I hope this can be added as an addendum to the committee paper, so we can take note of if it can be published with the papers.
They're not published. We'll come back to it.
Well, my plea will be that it is published because it's a formal submission to us, and it does set out the issues very clearly against each of the lessons from the paper. We've heard about hospitals. There's one specific I'll ask and see if we can get a factual answer. So it's action item 2. I'm wondering, have we got any statistics of how many instances there have been of clients breaching licences, and statistics of what actions have been taken? And if you haven't got them up your...
Did you say that one?
Yes, so it's action number 2. The providers will use the management of incidents to identify any ongoing complaints and antisocial behaviour in the community, where this leads to a client breaching the rights, the provider may take steps to end this, and so on. So there is a specific promise there, but what I want to know is what's happened. So how many times it happened, and what actions have been taken factually. So there should be a factual answer to that. And if you haven't got it on your fingertips now, Stuart, I'm very happy to take a written answer on it. But I think it's the sort of thing, it's that we do need to delve into that level of factual detail to get on top of the subject.
So I haven't got that one, my fingertips. I think we all need to take that one away and provide the committee with a written answer.
I'm very happy to take a written answer on that indeed, of course, Stuart, and I will now defer to the residents and committee members.
Thank you, Shelley. Just a very quick question. On page 53, bullet 4.21, talking about CCTV monitoring. It says that there are 12 fixed CCTV and 2 redeployable to aid in monitoring and evidence gathering. To what extent are you using that CCTV footage to prevent and actually catch people in the act so that they can crimes? People can be taken to CPS.
So to detect, we're using to both prevent and detect. Yeah, so that they're dual purposes. So the idea being obviously around the prevention, we have CCTV cameras up for people who would get up to things that we wouldn't want to get up to. Don't do that because there's CCTV cameras there. The evidence base around the academic evidence based around the efficacy of prevention, there is one. It's not as strong as detection. So obviously there is quite a strong evidence base around detection. So we are using and do use the CCTV cameras for the purposes of tracking criminals across the ward, for gathering evidence, which the police will then use to identify offenders and pursue offenders. So it's actually actively used as part of our response to actual crime within such crime. But within Scott, I didn't know if there's anything particularly you want to say around these things.
No, it's part of our it's part of the tasking. So CCTV actually is probably one of the changes we brought in now, is that it's part of the both monthly strategic tasking and the weekly tasking that we do on the borough. Because we realise, as Stuart said, the evidence space around it is really strong. So it's about actually, we have the CCTV manager in that meeting to hear and see what are the policing trends and what are the hotspots, and so they actually know what to task their teams with, and to look for key offenders, identify them, let the officers know, or let the teams know, whoever it might be the SEP team, or just let the teams know that there's somebody who's identified in the area. So it does proactively get monitored as well. Yeah, so it's not really kind of in this paper, but there are some live facial recognition bans in London that the Met have. I appreciate there's a divided opinion on their use, and there's a debate around that. They are Home Office approved. We deployed to one in Earls Court, and the results on that were really good. So we had 4 arrests of that in just a few hours in Earls Court. One had breached their sexual and harm prevention order. One was wanted for a hate crime, I believe. There are 2 other arrests. So actually, it does actually bring results. I'm really pushing that we bring that back in on Earls Court. That was on a rainy day in Earls Court. So I think if we put it out in the summer, we'd see some real good results. And there's been some publicity across London where actually it's really effective. And again, coming back to my usual point, efficient as well.
Thank you, John.
So my final question was specifically on Bramham Gardens. A number of the people who are living there are seeing needles when their children are playing in the garden. So what specific bits and specific things are you doing to try and tackle some of the Bramham Gardens issues? Because there have been people doing needles or doing drugs on people's doorsteps or leaving hypodermic needles in gardens.
Yeah, so part of our monthly strategic, which informs our weekly tasking, looks at the hotspots in the area. So we will have our street enforcement team there who we tasked to go and patrol that area and remove some of those items. We also have our police, and what
is really important is around the intelligence around these people, so we can take more targeted action. That will sort of feed into the work with the hostels. So they're identified as residents within the hostels. We work with the hostels to feed into that enforcement side, and also encourage them to engage with some support to address their needs. So that's sort of the model we use for hotspot areas, around that visibility, and then the enforcement wise on there, sort of cleaning that up while they're there.
So the committee will recall I've mentioned in the past the weekly tasking meeting where we have all the council enforcement teams and the police to respond to these issues as they come up. And that will include our waste colleagues as well. The long-term issue is kind of an enforcement and treatment one. It's kind of both of those arms around those individuals who are evidently living a lifestyle completely consumed by taking drugs.
And just to add on that, and I know we've heard this evening how difficult some people do find to report stuff, but if we don't have the information, or police don't have it, we can't task the resource there. So it's really important that people do report things.
Thank you, Jana. Thank you. Look, I noticed in 4.2, I'll talk about the TSBO coming in, section public space protection order, thank you. And there's a disconnect between what your lady says and the issues of assisting, and I think we've heard that tonight. You then look at the tables in 4.8 and 4.9, and there's a massive focus on dump rubbish, and then there's some FPMs and some PSBO related issues. I look at that and I go, is the street enforcement team focused enough on the PSBO, or indeed should it actually look at more of that? Or, and I would refer to residents, is the waste as irritating an ASB issue, or actually where are the priorities for the street team, and should it actually be the other way around?
If I could take that, so I'd agree with you. So the street enforcement team over last year, there's been a really good kind of piece of right across council working. A big focus initially was on kind of doing all of the work, and they work borough-wide. A lot of that was around environmental crime. In March of this year, you might have seen my new enforcement contractor partners, Kingdom, started, and their focus is solely on kind of high volume environmental crime. Because as you've said, what we've realised is that work is simpler to kind of see enforce against. And then we're increasingly focusing our street enforcement team on the work around PSBO, and we want to support the police with gathering evidence for criminal behaviour orders, closure orders. So you will see a shift now. I think we heard earlier that in the last 6 weeks, we've seen a lot more of an increase in kind of our presence and work to address that. I hope the Conservatives will be able to keep it up. I'm hoping that by bringing Kingdom on board and a more of a focus on the PSBO offences, that you'll see that. And I'd agree with you that it needs to be more approach with thing going forward. I would be concerned about leaving the environment stuff behind, but I'm confident that with Kingdom, they can do that work and that we can focus more. Leanne's been training with the SET teams. They should now be equipped to do more work in that area. And that was new work for a lot of them, and it has taken some time to get that on board. The figures aren't in your patch, but since March, you've seen a huge uptick in PSBO enforcement and fines issued across a range of offences. But it's a fair point, and you are right to place.
Thank you. There's just one other question. On page 64, you talk about cumulative impact zone, and it focuses on licensed premises. And I want to know, have we looked at what other pieces of legislation are out there in order to have a broader remit? So it's not just licensed premises, it's the area or the business area as a whole, so that you're not just having papers. Because clearly the research is saying, from a licensed perspective, no, you don't think it merits it. But actually, I look at the challenges and I genuinely look at it and I go, are we looking too narrowly at only licensed premises? And can we look broader? I don't know what other legislation there is out there. I'd like to go away and have a look at it.
Yes, I think we will. I think I've put a plug in that the licensing consultation, the new licensing policy got out. I think it was this week. So we will kind of welcome any comments on that. And logically fed back for the licensing policy.
Thank you. Well,
first I'd like to reinforce the need this committee has to have an inclusion of Councillor Durian's paper. I understand it's been published. I don't think the chair would treat me kindly if I took the option, which is open, which is for me to sit there and read it out to everybody, which might take about 15 minutes. So the alternatives to that, can we have an undertaking from our governance officers that they will find method? One of the ways that I understand it is that I can ask the question, what is in Councillor Durian's paper, and could you please report back to the next committee? If you can. Okay, so that I've asked that. The next question I wanted to ask, targeted interventions, and we've heard something about that these have been very useful when they've been happening, but they need to be repeated, particularly in the case of Airbnb. If the target is the miscreant, the person who puts the rubbish out on the wrong day, so they don't know about it, is there a way of getting at the Airbnb operators? Now, I know some of this is a very diverse market, but there are buildings in Earls Court which are basically Airbnb buildings run by professional management operations, and at least those could be targeted in a focused way. Get them with good practice, they find their clients less they fulfill their operations. That's the question. And the third and final one is that the council has just spent a lot of money upgrading Hogarth Road. I understand it's being dug up by one of the utilities, or wasn't digging up a bit. There's some roadworks going on there. But the key question is, how is the council going to follow up with its roadworks improvement, to its street scene, the physicality improvement, within activating and enlivening that street to make sure that good use is made of the pavement that's being created, rather than doing back crossroad gambling then?
That's good. You
a few questions. But it's good to hear that rubbish enforcement is still a hot topic, so that's good. The answer is yes, there are tools that you can use against landlords as opposed to individual under like community protection warnings and notices. It is complex, you need to evidence it has an ongoing effect on the area and where it's coming from. So yes, we could, but it's more complex than it sounds. I know the planning enforcement team also they work out Airbnbs, and the Scrutiny Committee environment recently had a paper on it. With regards to kind of Hogarth Road and how we use it, it is an issue when we leave the road up. But our officers in the highways team, they do kind of go back. It does take some time, but they will make sure that it's reinstated with the correct kind of York stone or the correct kind of pavement material.
And is there any opportunity for the council to follow up this physicality improvement with enlivening and activating the street?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of work there. There's quite a lot of kind of destination work in Earls Court at the moment. So the growth and delivery team have done a lot of page shape work there. So part of the Earls Court bid, for example, is part of that.
Right.
There's also work around a shop code, a design guide for shop fronts. And Kim Taylor Smith and the lead members do a lot of work around the high street in that area. And as you know, there are some businesses that we're working with, as well as the Earls Court development as well. So there's a lot of work at Earls Court at the moment. And I hope we'll see the action plan outcomes.
Thank you. That's simple.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'd like to say I second the sentiment that Councillor Durian's paper to be included, and the rest I defer to the more councillors and the rest of us.
Excellent. So now I'm going to turn to the councillors in the audience, and starting with the water councillors.
Do you want to speak first? Right. I did cut it.
Yeah, I'm really 2 minutes, Linda.
All right, fine. It'll be slightly.
It's not a place for
speakers. I think we need to go back to the reasons why the original councillor call to action came about. It primarily rose from the day-to-day experience that residents had, street livers, rough sleepers, overt drug use and supply, and the perception that Earls Court Road and the area was in decline. The introduction of the PSPO was a borough initiative, well-meaning, but it was effectively under-resourced from the get-go, and that included underestimation of police capacity. The introduction of the street enforcement team was another well-intentioned initiative, but without appropriate training and resourcing, failed to address the key issues. The newly commissioned service from Kingdom is targeting low-hanging fruit and not areas of concern, with the consequence creating displacement to residential streets. The recent Working Party group on hostels highlighted the concentration of high needs in and around the board boundary and the lack of social responsibility of the wardens. The supported housing strategy reports states that the supported housing need assessment estimated an increase from 515 units to 575. To residents, it's immaterial as to whether the individuals have accommodation or not, whether they come from out of borough. It is their presence that causes concern. So although the outreach team do respond, their primary concern are for those that do not have accommodation at night and not for those on our streets during the day. Nominations via the housing register is a significant factor, whether to supported, general needs, temporary accommodation, and particularly placements we've experienced by a company called the Clearinghouse. In conclusion, if we're going to learn anything from this exercise, it is without identifying the root causes to the problem, whether it's litter or ASB, and respond to that, what we'll have is a well-meaning initiative that looks good but fails to deliver.
Thank you, Nicola, and for cutting the speech so clearly and obviously. Thank you. Ted.
I can agree with everything that Linda said, and I think on the previous paper you already heard from a number of residents in Earls Court, and that is very typical for the feedback that I'm getting from the rest of the residents in Earls Court as well. And the anti-behavior is definitely still there, and actually we see also a number of new faces over the last few years coming about and causing concerns on our streets. As Linda mentioned, we have to look at the root causes of why these people are there in the first place and try to resolve this. But I think there's another question towards the end of the process when actually the individuals have been identified and have received a community protection notice or even a criminal behavior order and therefore have been banned from those courts. That is not the end of it, because in my personal experience and in the feedback that I'm getting from residents, these individuals are still walking around those courts. So what is being done at that stage to resolve that issue? Because these individuals should not be there. They have been identified as causing problems. They are still constantly, regularly visible in the court and causing the exact same problems as at the beginning.
I can see a clear question there. Would someone like to address that?
Well, I was just going to ask, is anybody reporting that they're walking around the ward? Because
the problem we have, Sarah, is reporting fatigue. Actually, reporting fatigue,
I know,
because the process is actually quite difficult.
But we can't do anything if people don't report it. The police can't.
I report tons.
Yes.
Leanne knows. She's seen it. I do it. I used to do it every day.
Go through the chat, please.
Sorry.
So we've got an issue that there's reporting fatigue, and the lead member is very clearly saying we do need to report. MT, can I come to you?
Can I speak about the hostels now? Because it touches on it.
Actually, before we do that, I'm going to, Councillor Dorian asked me to present his view. So we've had the first two ward councillors. I'm going to give the third ward councillor, had asked me to speak on his behalf. I'm not going to read all the. I'm just going to bring out the points that he wanted to make about this. And this is, and there are 3 points particularly he wanted to make, and that is that joint action is clearly been effective, and particularly when it's part of a sustained effort. But the real issue is sustaining that effort, and that it continues to be an issue that we don't see a sustained effort. He wanted to stress the importance of broader partnerships. That's where the real wins have come, and emphasise the need for much more transparency about supportive placements, which I think will come into other things that people are going to say. So I just wanted to put that on the record, just the 3 particular points that Councillor Dorian wanted to make, as he couldn't be with us tonight. So now I'll come to you.
Okay, so when we say Earls Court call to action, the Earls Court area actually includes part of my ward too. And I lived in that part of my ward. The top of it is contiguous with Earls Court for 26 years. And I always thought I was living in Earls Court until I became a councillor. So when we did the hostels, I wanted to make sure we went all round the ward. And Bella Jessup did a lot of work working out where the hostels were, the people in them, the level of need. So the lists we were provided with were not up to date, they were not accurate, and all the rest of it. They didn't really exist, but now they do. But what we found was in the Earls Court Redcliffe area, and it's not the whole of Redcliffe, and it's not the whole of Earls Court, it's the bits that are together. So geographically, in a very small area, you have more than 30% of all the supported people who, to need to live in hostel supported housing, etc. Not only that, you have the biggest hostels and you have the highest need hostels. So what we did is, I would say some of the hostels we saw in the north of the borough, the smaller ones, even some of them with high needs, there was a kind of pastoral attitude and care of the people, and they were not causing problems. But Princess Beatrice House, the ones in Redcliffe Gardens and the one that used to be on the Cromwell Road. So fortunately, there is some respite because the very big hostel on the Cromwell Road is now, it's a different iteration. It's a short stay place. So it's not quite as bad, but it's the density, and nobody thought about it. This wasn't planned. And I absolutely know that we can't change it. I absolutely know that we haven't got the money to put the hostels here, there and everywhere, which is what my resident and Earls Court residents would like. That is not a possibility. So the only thing we can do is manage them better.
Absolutely.
And to be honest, we came out with 10 recommendations, but overall, some of those hostels are failing. And the attitude of some of the people looking after the people in the hostels was basically, when they walk out of that door, they are no longer our responsibility, and they are become the responsibility of the police and of the ward councillors, but not of them. And we as a council are paying third-party people to look after these people, to provide us a service. And, they are, some of them, extremely vulnerable. They're suffering from mental illness, addictions, all the rest of it. Sometimes people who it is actually very hard to help. But I think, the hostels in the area that we're discussing and the call to action, even though I don't believe, they cause all the antisocial behaviour. I mean, what we are offering is not good enough. And I think we really have to go to our contracts. Well,
So
I'd really like to pick that up.
So I think we don't have any of our housing colleagues here tonight, but I think we will feed all this back. You know that on Princess Beatrice, it was owned by Look Ahead.
Yeah.
They decided to put it up for sale. The building is in a terrible condition. People should not be living there, frankly.
Yeah, I know that.
And the council has the council has bought the building and will be refurbishing it, but we can't change the use. But we bought it so we can put our residents in there rather than somebody else buying it and putting residents from Camden, Fulham or wherever. So we can't get the change of use, but surely we are going to make it into a better building and hope that there is better support there.
Let me come back to that. I am not someone who is saying shut them down. I am someone who thinks we don't want people on the street. We want them in hostels. We want to try and help them, even though some people you can't help, but you can still try. But what we've got to do is manage them. And we know about Princess Beatrice's House. We've talked about it, and I do have hope.
A clear message that we need to manage those hostels better.
Yeah, and I hope that will happen.
I'm not going to open.
Yeah, I might just want to add something.
Sorry,
sorry, Leanne.
And I think the importance, which I think is important from the report, is the continued focus and ongoing need to improve the coordination, which is something that I've been working closely with the police and the SET team on, around when we identify these individuals. And we've been working with the street population team as well, is actually going back to these hostels and holding them accountable as well. So that is a big area which we have started, but we need to continue that and sort of work and provide updates along with some of the updates that we've given to you.
Okay, members of the public.
Firstly, I'd like to address Councillor Simmons' question actually about has it made a difference? Because I think it's important that we kind of address that. And I think since the call to action came in March, I would say, it fluctuates, as the gentleman here made reference to earlier. But I think it would be disingenuous of me to say that it hasn't marginally improved. I think it has. I think certain individuals have been removed from the ward that cause a lot of problem, but some of them, as the gentleman said, do come back. And I think that is an issue, and especially where I live in Nevern Place, there's two well-known people, I'm sure to you, Owen, that you know exactly who I'm referring to. What I think is also true is that the sort of the issues are proportionate to the amount of enforcement going on, and that's both the police and actually when the council ran its month of action in November 22, we actually saw the benefit of that for 4 months at least afterwards, and it's like pushing down on a pillow, I suppose, but because it eventually comes back up, and no one expects the council to be able to produce that much resource all the time, but clearly it had an effect at that point with that sheer number of resources on the street. And I can see through I'm aware of some of the arrests that Owen mentioned earlier on in Earl's Court, having spoken to PCSO Overy the other day. But I think we are unfortunate as well that we suffered through when the PSPO first came in, we had 2 PCs that were moving on to other pastures new that were not replaced. We have a PCSO that's unfortunately been suspended, who was the life and soul of Earl's Court, unfortunately. So we've had some unfortunate circumstances. But my question would be to the police, in those circumstances, why were resources not perhaps reprioritised into Earl's Court from other wards that were not necessarily suffering as much?
Thank you. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, so I'm sure the council sat opposite me would be deeply unhappy if I took 2 PCs on a ward, I took one away to go to Earl's Court. I think ultimately is, and I agree with your point. I think it's a really, really good one. It's a very difficult thing. I haven't got enough people in neighbourhoods, really. I'm being honest. We want more. The government is giving us money to uplift neighbourhood precincts, so maybe that will come through. But Earl's Court does have more than other wards. We do have more resources in Earl's Court. What the capacity capability of that team is limited.
But I think that's being met now, and I think we're seeing the benefit of that fully resourced team. But obviously, we went through a cycle where it wasn't. Can I just add one further question?
Very quickly, because I really need to move the meeting on because I've got one very big and important paper, and I want to hear from other people.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of good work that's happened on small quick wins, as been mentioned. But I think the whole holistic approach to the call for action needs to be thought about, and maybe the panel would consider a lead member owning cross-department effort on this, so that we don't have housing here today, for example. There's clearly housing issues. I'm just wondering if the panel would consider that moving forward.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take some more comments and questions, but please can we make them really brief because we need to move on. Gentleman in the white shirt and gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I just did a few things. So I moved to Earl's Court in 2022. Since then, I have actually seen a noticeable difference, a noticeable improvement. I would say there is still more to do. I think much of what's been discussed here has come up on that. One thing actually has been touched on is the enforcers. I do see them out on the street, and it's very good to see them. And they are pulling people over regularly, indiscriminate as well. There's all sorts of people you see being picked up, all sorts of different things, and it is good to see them. For me, going back to some of the things that Councillor Hammond was talking about, for instance, sort of light crime, people riding on the pavement. I'm walking down Warwick Road, and suddenly there's a bike just shooting past you. I've actually seen people getting ticketed for that, and it is good to see that. Thank you. Second, Councillor Hammond said in terms of police reporting, she's absolutely right. The police won't respond unless they know there's a problem, people reporting. The only slight issue is I've had a parcel stolen from my door before. I've reported to the police, and they said because it's a the item, I've given them ring doorbell footage because the value of the item, it's not in the public interest to follow up on the crime. And the guy who stole the parcel is very well known, and they just automatically didn't even think he even made it in front of an actual officer. So I think that would help in terms of, because I think Councillor Brook is right, you can't act on crime if you don't know it is there. But I think it is also up to the police to follow up on things as well. I'm glad you actually mentioned facial recognition, because I was actually in Stratford yesterday and I saw a facial recognition van, and I was actually thinking we could do with one of these in Earl's Court. And it feeds back into what you were saying earlier. All this stuff is happening, but we as residents don't know about it. agree very, very strongly with the councillor in the stripy top in terms of her points on hostels. I think she's right on the head on that one. And I do think there is some of the hostels you don't even know are there because they're operated well and the people there, are getting the care they need. There are, I'd say, 2 or 3 particular hostels I know of that are not providing a very good service at all. For me, the ones are Warwick Road and Pennyworth are ones that, because they're not very well run, they generate a lot of problems and they're not providing the right level of care to the people inside that actually need it. And I do think that the concentration of hostels in a very small area is not conducive to a supportive environment for people with those complex needs. Just finish off. Sorry, I don't
Very quickly.
The actual agenda headline feels a little conclusive, but I'm actually getting the impression from councillors on the committee that they want more. They agree with us that I think, although a lot has happened, more needs to be done. So I'd like to just kind of perhaps request this come back to the committee on.
I don't think this is going to come back to this committee again, but it will probably take on the life somewhere. Sarah.
I'm just thinking about what we've heard tonight. Maybe we should hold a meeting in Earl's Court. Probably not now before the summer, but maybe in the autumn, so that we can, we will have gone through another few months and we can really hear what's working or not working.
And maybe take up the sort of one lead member to coordinate across.
I think we get a couple of lead members there, and yeah.
Okay, I know I've got one more contributor. I promised to say something.
Yes. So
I know you're going to do it briefly. You have that look on your face.
I do have written down. Okay, so so the SCT around Earl's Court, I've noticed a decrease in patrols, and also when I approach the SCTs, they're reluctant to do anything even when it's right in front of us. So this is something that I'm concerned about. And then on top of that, you've got Kingdom to come to help with the local council's enforcement. But I would have said, it would have been better to put that money towards more SCTs so that we can do actual enforcement. Littering is a secondary thing. There's much more important things to focus on. Going back to you're saying about the police enforcement for the last 6 weeks. This was the police enforcement. It wasn't more like to do with SCTs. The rest, there's still a lot of the rest hanging around, which is the begging, loitering, substance abuse. So that's my comments. It's just more SCT to be around and to be able to actually report to them and for them to actually do something about it. Because from my experience, they're actually avoiding Earl's Court and going other places and avoiding reporting. That's what I've seen. And I've taken names.
Guys, if you could pass them on, I appreciate it. I'm sorry about that experience. Obviously, you're reporting on that you face. With the Kingdom, they're actually, I won't go into the financial model, but it means that we have more resource for the set team than officers. But I would accept that we need to prioritise the set team to do more ASB work, BSPO work than environmental enforcement, and that should allow that, which you'll see over time. People who are in the workforce should engage with residents. So part of the enforcement team is to be visible presidents to engage with people and are positive and support the community. So I'd be interested in hearing that's not the case, and I do apologise.
Thank you. I'm going to say very quickly.
Sorry. Just in regards to the police enforcement, a lot of work has been in coordination because off the back of those closure orders, actually making sure those vulnerable residents are rehoused somewhere out of Earl's Court is an important factor, which we've sort of done even as recently as Friday. So those things don't happen in isolation. We do ensure those are coordinated as well, and the after effects of those are managed.
Okay, I'm going to bring this discussion to a close just because time is moving on, not because it isn't very important. And I think everyone around this table has expressed how important they thought it is, as have many members in the audience. So I think the 3 takeaways from this, or 3 recommendations published in this committee, are about hostel management and placements, the importance that we'd like to see ascribed to that in future. Acknowledging that the sustaining the effort and joint working have to be embedded going forward, and that in the long term, as the lead member suggested, perhaps a meeting in Earl's Court and making sure that we continue to push, or that someone in the cabinet continues to push that cross-working across the council. But thank you very much to everyone who's taken the time late at night on Monday, what is supposed to be something to contribute. Thank you very much. And let's move on to the next statement, which is the meetings have financial structure.
Sorry.
Madam Chair. It is like Madam Chair, my nephew was suddenly and I have runny nose. I need to excuse myself. Completely understand. And you're sticking with it for so long. Heroically, because I know I'm on the company. I can imagine. Right, item 6 is the medium-term financial strategy, which looks at our financial strategy over the next 4 years, taking account of both local and national issues. And I'm going to invite Jen, my lead member of finance, digital and efficiency, Lisa Taylor, Director of Financial Management, and Lynn McCusker, Assistant Director of Corporate Finance, to present or to make some brief introductory remarks.
Yes, conscious of time, I'll make them very brief.
Not least you in your new roles.
Not least.
Have you been in your new role?
It is, not least if my title has the word efficiency in it. I shall try and keep it brief. But really, I want to thank my predecessor, Johnny Thalasitis, for getting it to where this paper was. Obviously, we took over after much of the work had already been done. And of course, thank you to the officers as well. I think it presents a somewhat stark picture of the council's finances. I'm conscious that many councils around the country are facing significantly worse positions than we are. We're very keen to make sure that the council obviously puts together a balanced budget, but there's some really, really strong headwinds ahead, not least we've seen in today's spending review that there's not a flood of money coming towards local government. I'd also like to thank officers because I think this is also now one of the shortest MTFSs we've put together. We've reduced it by about half in length, so at least we're starting with a little bit of reduction in the sense of paper generation. But yes, happy to take
Thank you very much. I'm going to go around and start with Greg.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Chair. And the first thing I'll welcome in this this paper, paragraph 8.8, the new work streams in the transformation programme. And we're very sure there should be not to welcome the very specific line of work about what we might do less of or stop doing altogether, which is something that the officers will know I mentioned on several occasions in the last municipal year, and I'm glad to see it's in there, and it's something that you'll get the chance to work on over the next year. My question is going to be really high level for the new lead rep member, who I welcome to his seat, and having had the benefit of at least 3 weeks, if not a month, to get your feet under the table and take an overview of your portfolio. What's keeping you awake at night? What's the top risks and opportunities as you see them as you start the role, and perhaps also reflect on the government's comprehensive spending review as whatever you claimed a bit today?
Yes, so I mean, really the things keeping me awake at night are happening across the country, but they're obviously acutely felt in Kensington and Chelsea. We have an ageing population, and we have ever increasing, very high needs in children's services. So to get offhand the exact percentage, but a huge amount of our budget goes towards those two specific areas. We're seeing already that we're building in demographic growth towards adult social care. We're building that in again, families and children's. But coupled on top of that, we also then have the issue of temporary accommodation, which, whilst it's slightly easier to quantify in economic terms, you can sort of price in rental rises and property value growth. What's really hard to price in is exactly where this increased demand amongst children especially is coming from. We're seeing sort of expected growth in adults because of, it's easier to predict aging. But what we're really finding is the level of cost of some of our children's placements and the support we're offering is growing, perhaps not exponentially, but incredibly quickly. So somewhere that I'm really keen for us to be working on is we need to get much tighter at our sort of temporary accommodation forward look, the modelling going into our TA budget. Already you've heard about us purchasing properties earlier this evening to try and alleviate some of that. Of course, the pension funds, we've taken the decision now to try and unlock £100 million in purchasing property to address that. The one that we don't really have full handle on is how exactly is it that we're going to address the demand spike that we're seeing in children's, but also just the general shift from NHS spending, where people are initially being looked after, to now the social care spending, which sits with Kensington and Chelsea. So those are probably the things that are keeping me up at night. As for the spending review, I glanced at the beginning of this meeting to see just what it means for us as a country, and sort of put it into some broad context. When Greece was declared in sort of financial ruin in 2007 and 2008, its debt to GDP ratio is within 5 or 10% of where we are today as a nation. We obviously have the ability to print our own money to try and pay down our debts, but borrowing costs across the UK are now higher than they were under Liz Truss for the 30-year gilt, and we've got to pay for things. So as a country, the macro level, I'm not sure today's spending review really has addressed how we're able to bring down some of the larger costs. On the micro level, it just means that they're not giving us any more money to try and alleviate some of the concerns that we've seen going into this.
Thank you. Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions. First one is on page 82 about business rates, paragraph 6.37. What's the impact on the fall? I think we're going to be fully reimbursed and fall from 75% to 40% back. What we're doing to support businesses and the high streets in general in relation to business rates, and what more can we do withstanding that?
Yes, so I'll let also give a more technical answer about what we're doing. I mean, one of the things that I've already started a bit of a review on some of the processes that we created in the way that businesses engage with us. For instance, even just simple things such as how they pay their business rates is a somewhat complex procedure for people. Even the ability to just set up a straightforward direct debit is not as straightforward as we'd like it to be. But naturally, you're saying sort of the financial assistance we might be giving.
So obviously, thank you. We will continue to honour the business rates relief that's referenced in this paragraph, so they will get some relief. We do have some hardship funds as well, and opportunities for businesses to apply to have some of their council tax maybe reduced, or if they're in debt, to look at that. But there isn't masses we can do as a local authority, but we will do everything we can to support them. So obviously it's important that we keep businesses in our borough as much as we can, and we will work with them. And we've got bids, and we'll work with them as well. And we've got some of our officers in other teams as well out there working with economic development things. So we'll do as much as we can to support them.
Okay, thank you. Final question is on page 83, paragraph 6.48. Our commercial rent income is about 9.6% of our total income. What are we doing there to generate more from our commercial footprint across the borough, generate more commercial income to reduce our deficit?
Yes, this is what I know that council are looking at very closely. We've also recently implemented our social investment policy to try and make sure that we're using our assets as fairly as we can, recognising that they do generate an income as well as offering good community support, depending on the tenancy. I think where we're working sort of in most detail at the moment about making sure that there's an equity on the leases where we have social value leases, to make sure that even when we do give a sub-market rent, that the tenants recognise that sub-market rent, but also that it's fair for all tenancies across the borough. But we do obviously need to make sure that our commercial rent is, if not least, keeping pace with the market, but perhaps trying to push ahead. So Emma's team have been working very hard to at least work on anywhere where we have sort of debts with some of our tenants to make sure that we are taking them through to the court to get that money back out. But we also have recently sort of boosted the team in that area where we do have now some, I think they were competent before, but very competent people now working in that department to try and really make sure that we are getting the right value for our properties.
And what I'm talking about specifically is probably consolidating the council officers from disparate buildings to make sure that we have a smaller number of 80, 90, maybe almost 100% usage, so that any extra buildings we've got can be commercially rented out. Because at the moment, we've got I don't know what the exact number is, but it's going to be a percentage in lots of different places, which means we're not using our commercial property efficiently. As you've got efficiency in your title, could we look at consolidating council offices in one place to be able to rent out?
Yes, so there's corporate property, it's the buildings that we occupy, and then there's commercial that we rent up to the market. So the corporate property, there's in fact a demo of how the building may function, set up now on the first floor. You can see how we're adapting some of the desks to try and get more people in per floor. You're right, we do need to reduce our estate. Some of the issues we find with that is that our estate have never been commercial property, so that they don't have the necessary sort of EPC ratings that are necessary to rent them out. They're also sometimes configured in a way that isn't incredibly lettable. So the work is ongoing, as the chair says, it is one of the work streams. And already you'll see that this building is certainly busier at the expense of some of our other buildings.
Thank you, John.
Okay, two questions. When do you see the pension fund temporary accommodation being kicking in terms of an impact on the budget overall?
I should say, I'm sure officers will remind me that it hasn't formally happened yet. It still needs to go through the necessary committees in the investment committee, but it then also has to be deployed. So given, in all likelihood, I believe it's March, by which point money has to be spent, it's a very short time frame in which to get that volume of money out. We don't want to just be buying anything at any price. That's in itself not going to be very prudent. But obviously, we can realise the saving the moment we complete on a property and move the family in. So if we can take the decisions, prejudging them, if we to take the decisions as promptly as we can, and we go to the market, I know some soft market testing has already been done. We're quite confident that, especially on large blocks where we're talking 100, 150 units, we can move so many people in quite quickly that differential from what we're paying to the private sector to what we'd be paying to effectively to the pension fund would kick in.
And the second question, would a similar approach be taken to the children's issue in terms of central provision as opposed to disparate responses?
I do know the children's team, I believe there's one placement which is costing us around £40,000 a week, and these are huge eye-watering costs, of which a big chunk of that is the accommodation. I know Emma and indeed through with Catherine are looking at whether there is, terrible word, but a synergy to actually go and buy a building and then contract out the management and the operation. The advice we've had from corporate property who have done this before in other boroughs is that in theory it does make a lot of sense, but so much of the cost is in the contract that once you've sort of bottomed out the rent, you still have to manage that contract efficiently, and there's a huge sort of private sector risk that's taken because of the really high needs that they're having to deal with.
But maybe it's sneaky. Given the damage that's happened to Marks and Spencer's because of its online attack, and we've seen it with TfL, what are we doing in terms of avoiding that sort of financial hit on the business?
That's definitely an extra third question.
Yes, well, I mean, you'll see page 92. We're putting forward a growth bid for cyber security, 495,000. In fact, I asked today, it sounds great, but I need to know that 495 is the level we need to be spending. It may be that it needs to be a million and 495. I'm not the technical expert in that sector. We obviously have to trust our officers that they are. But I'm sure M&S thought that they had technical experts in their buildings as well. So we can never alleviate all the risk. We just have to make sure that we're certainly the most secure council we can be. Perhaps push the problem somewhere else.
Thank you. Well,
one question, but first of all, I'd like to welcome 8.3, page 92, the priority that's now been given to transformation and so on. And it was a really big push that such a working group made 4 years ago. And we made this our number one priority. It's really good to see it come through, but not just come through in central statements, but also the seniority and skill set of the officers and the links that they have cross-working across the whole council, reporting directly to the chief executive. So I think it's up to the point where it needs to be. Within that, under page 97, 8.27, there's a mention of this reports back to leadership in November and prior to that to scrutiny in September. Is there any other way in which, since this is such a broad subject with so many different facets, is there any other way that OSC could contribute to this work? Maybe by holding a workshop or something of that sort. I'm just thinking of, there are a number of different ways in which OSC could further examine this. And I think since this is such a new and major and central operation within the council, it would be worth thinking about how we best can help.
I learned as a very young councillor that I'm not allowed to interfere in what scrutiny committees do as a lead member, and I've been reprimanded enough. So I think, I'd welcome all the support we possibly can. I'm sure my colleagues would as well. These are not going to be easy decisions to take, or indeed easy changes that we have to bring about through the council. Having a proper transformation team is helpful, because they are able to look across all the departments, and already that's starting to pay dividends. That said, we've corporately, I think, frankly, because we've been able to afford it, we haven't had to do this deep transformation that some other authorities have had to look at. I'm very keen that we don't simply end up presenting options of cutting a service just for the sake of realising that saving. There are definitely ways we can do the work more efficiently. I think that's why the leaders put the title in my job description. So it's really making sure that where you identify as a committee, you identify those potential efficiencies or potential ways, better ways of working, but we collectively across party bring forward, because we don't want to cut services. We want to improve them.
I just think that if this is a way of us redefining how we work, what we do, and all the rest of it, it's more or less the kitchen sink and everything else in the council offices, to really have 10 minutes to discuss it before 9 in the evening, it's not the best way. Then maybe in addition to that, and further scrutiny in September, when we got a report, that maybe prior to that or after that, we can have a workshop, have a broader discussion. Or maybe it's
the budget working group. Yeah, I have got the timetable here. We've got 2 reports coming on transformation, and I'm meeting with Preeti tomorrow to talk about the budget working group and bring something to this committee in July.
But I think a broader discussion rather than just taking things to committee would be great.
Yeah, but also the members can't interfere with scrutiny, but they can suggest, and scrutiny will listen because they would want to contribute. So
I'm happy to suggest that we do. My door is readily open.
Excellent.
And yeah, I think because we're now trying to look multi-year, we're sort of we need to be able to look at things that won't really pay out for 2 or 3 years from now, rather than just what things can we say today.
Thank you. Mike, do you have any more questions?
No, I can say one question.
So,
excellent.
Okay, I'll be very brief, Mr. Chair, thank you. Jamie already mentioned all these unknowns, and the picture is rather bleak. So my question to you all will be, the cumulative gap, is the figure realistic enough and robust enough? Do we have enough buffer in that figure?
It's realistic.
Officers probably won't thank me for jumping in here. I think it's probably slightly under where it needs to be. I think we're right to include demographic pressures, but the numbers are just completely eye-watering when we see a single placement of that scale. Temporary accommodation is not a problem that's going to solve itself. Obviously, the pension fund will help, but we're not seeing a surge in home building or sort of a huge growth in the ability for us to house people. So I'm concerned that perhaps even on things such as even staff pay awards, we budgeted at this point last year for 2%, 3.2% has been put forward, and that's being disputed. So I don't want to do politics too much, but I'm slightly cautious that the national government are not really holding the reins on public expenditure, and indeed another 100 billion goes out the door. So I think we've got to expect it to be worse and continually assess it as we go forward.
So moving on from EOR here.
Sorry, Chair, I've got 2 very brief ones.
Right, okay, well, very brief.
Very quickly, on page 91, 7.11, We talk about having the local council tax reduction scheme, which is great. It helps 12,500 households, but it mentions about that we have tried to increase work incentives. Do we have any data on that? So since 2020, have the households claiming this benefit increased or decreased?
We will have data.
Because that would be good to know.
Back in
Because
the office, literally.
the positive is 14.8 million. So it will be interesting to see, if this is working.
Yeah, we'll take that away and come back to you.
And the other one as well, under the capital strategy, page 103, bullet point, 1.12. The third bullet point talks about, council assets being suitable enough. And I remember the particularly in the VCS sector, where it's a very subsidized rent. And have we accounted for the fact that these properties they haven't been maintained over the years? And have we accounted the cost for that? Do we know the cost?
So that's exactly the work that's been ongoing. They've been working out what the fair market rent would be, the amount of disparity between those which are full and maintaining.
Not just the rent, but the actual.
And those which are full and maintaining, some which are not even paying utilities that we're covering. There's a sort of a plethora of different approaches that have been taken over a huge number of different tenancies. If it's not complete yet, I'm pretty sure it's pretty imminent. Those documents very close. So we will be able to effectively put a figure on just how much money we are putting into the voluntary sector for the work that they do in the area. We just need to make sure it's fair.
And have you costed the figure of actually renovating all these buildings that are in the
Yes, the asset strategy review is ongoing. It should be reporting back in later this year.
July.
Well,
Okay.
let me not make Councillor Will's life too difficult. It's later this year. It's fair.
Thank you. I'll just be very, very brief. I just have a couple of comments which I feel should be informing this work going forwards. The first one is how important it is that as council, we are not, nor seem to be, balancing our books on the back of our most vulnerable residents. I think there maybe could be said to have been a perception of that on various points previously, and I think it's something that as a council we should be alert to and trying to avoid as much as possible in the interest of being a fairer council. I wanted to just quickly say 8.9, where we're talking about workforce management. Again, a caveat there. I think in the past we've had cases where perhaps posts have been removed in a way which was not really sustainable in the long term, has led to problems for the council. The obvious one is building control before growthful. And I can also point to things like licensing as well, where posts have had to be put back. That we need to be mindful when we're looking at staffing requirements and workforce management, that we are not reducing things below a minimum operationally sound level. The service review and the process reviews, I am curious about those, and I would love to have some more detail on those as they are ongoing. And that's all I have to add.
I think fair points. I mean, obviously, we're just a handful of councils now that issue 100% council tax reduction scheme. So the 14.8 million that we give to 12,000 households is us making sure that we're not putting the burden on those most in need. Not least, we then couple that by using the household support funds that an extra
yes, I suppose, sorry to interrupt. I suppose I mean when we are, say, looking at which services could be stopped, or when we're looking at reducing posting housing needs. When I talk about bearing the cost or the burden of it, I mean in perhaps reduced services or service issues that might have been avoided. It is the people who are receiving those services then suffer any reductions. So I take your point completely, but I just think it's broader, as Will has said, it's everything, and the kitchen sink.
Understood, but in 811, my eye is most drawn to services that's more efficient. I mean, there's a number of ways, for instance, even estate management of our housing estate grounds. We also have a separate team doing our parks, and and it's very logical, but it's a sort of a legacy of the fact that the budgets were kept independent of one another.
Sure.
Is that the most effective way to do it? Are you actually get a better service by joining the two? We'd have to talk to both the councillor in charge of parks and also in charge of housing, but similar things for our highways, maintaining the footways on our estates, maintaining the footways on the public highway, slightly different. So there are some services that will likely have to be stopped. That's simply the reality of having a £52 million budget gap. And we are, as a council, absolutely determined to make sure that we're not stopping them in the fashion that you described. On the specific sort of jobs themselves, of course, we've got the chief executive in the room here tonight. We as councillors would not be taking decisions to reduce a service that then would have repercussions for the council in the way you described. And I'm sure Maxine is very conscious of that as well. I'm sure.
Yes, cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two questions, one of which chimes in with Claire's really, which is how are we, when we do, again on the service review, how will we assess the unintended consequences of any service stoppage or review? I think, is there going to be a robust kind of checklist or procedure for looking at them? Because often we can end up with false economies. And my second question is again about service stoppage. Is it time? Have we got to the crunch time where we actually have to challenge some of our commitments, like our commitment to net zero? Is now the time to stop and at least talk about it?
So on your second point, I think yes, we do. We have to have a sort of a mature discussion about what is it that a local authority is fiscally able to deliver nowadays. And we've seen the last decade, if not longer, the ever-growing number of responsibilities passed through to local government. So there are some things we simply aren't allowed to stop, and but there are also things that we do that we're obligated to do, but we do in a particularly RBKC way, which is perhaps above and beyond what any other council has been doing for many years. On the unintended consequences, I think that's a really fair challenge. My biggest concern would be on things where we invest in prevention.
Yeah.
So with children coming through into young adults, through to care leavers, etc. It may read as a line item on one of these papers, but every pound saved upstream may be saving you lots more money downstream. We have to really, I will have to trust the officers who have worked in other authorities, worked in Kensington and Chelsea, to know whether actually the investments we are making are saving us that money further down. But those are the areas I'm most conscious of the unintended consequences. On other things, obviously, if you reduce litter collection, you will have more litter. That's a slightly sort of expected outcome, and that might just be something we would have to live with. But we're going to have to balance the budget accordingly.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to draw the discussion to close. I think you can tell that there's a real interest and appetite in the work streams for transformation, particularly in sort of service reviews, but actually over all of them. And so I know that Jackie will work with Lisa to try and explore some opportunities perhaps for the committee, perhaps some input into those areas. But thank you very much for a very clear presentation and response to our questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving on. So 7 is the forward plan of okay, so I'll pull them through by page. Please stop me. Starting on page 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep. The supported housing strategy, I think, is quite an important one, especially in view of some of the discussions we've had tonight. But I'd like to flag that one up.
The supported housing strategy, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you want that to go to your committee plan?
I'd like to have a discussion with Joanna, maybe, and see if we think that's going to be good to do. Yes.
Yeah, you've got a discussion, haven't you, next week?
Yes.
Okay. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I know you've all looked at this before. 16, 17, so I can forward it through quickly. 18, 19, 20,
Can I ask you a question about 17?
Yep.
Sorry.
That's all right.
The council housing external cyclical works. It doesn't say what homes we're talking about. Is that okay? The fire
Page
house-
17.
We
can find that one up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Find out.
18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. No?
Shall I flag one on 21?
Yes.
Which is the housing management hoarding and supplement policy. I'd like to sort of put that on our list as well.
Yeah, you might want to talk to, although it would be your committee, you might want to talk to Lucy as well, because I think there was a discussion about building adult social care. So
Oh,
you would
excellent.
lead, it's your committee,
Yeah.
but you might want to have a chat.
Excellent.
23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and 30. Okay. Let's do the work program.
We've had a request for an item for the July meeting. So I have, the committee's going to have a discussion about your upcoming work programme. On the draft work programme for July, you've got 5 items. To put it into context, there's been a request for another item, so you can either tick something off or add something. So what it is, the community safety team have been in touch about the PSPO, it's all related to ASB. So there was a PSPO that covered the whole borough, which lapsed, and now the team are consulting with residents and everybody else that they need to consult with the closing date of 22nd of June. The PSPO will give the police and authorised officers of the council powers to confiscate alcohol from any person whose drinking causes antisocial behaviour in public spaces. That's the summary of what it's about.
It's a renewal of something that was noted in it.
It's something that lapsed. But so the officers have asked if you would like this on your agenda. It would have to be the July agenda because of the.
I don't think so.
I mean, I've already replied to the consultation. Perhaps you could send the link round to councillors and ask if they want to.
Yes, you can do that.
I don't think. And it's not a new thing. We're not sort of.
No.
Unless they need it to rubber stamp.
They don't need to rubber stamp.
And we're not here to rubber stamp anything.
No,
They're not rubber stamp.
And they are doing resident consultation, so as a committee, you can be assured that that is happening, which is the important thing.
We're assured.
It does raise another issue though, if there's 5 items already, which ones of those should we drop off?
I'll tell you what we've got. Council plan and dashboard, quarter 3 and 4. The quarter 4 finance report, the outturn report.
We need that one.
Yeah, Oracle closure.
Sorry,
The Oracle closure report. The response to the budget working group recommendations, I could combine that into the work programme report. And in the work programme report, I was going to do an annual report of what all of the committees have done over the year, including recommendations.
So that's quite an internal one, and you'd only take as long as the committee
be sure, yes.
Indulges itself. So I think that's probably all right.
The first one on the list, if that's what I think it is, doesn't add a lot of value.
Council plan dashboards.
I do think we need to see. Yeah. So I think we'll probably stick with that, but be very, very disciplined. Right. So with that, in the absence of any other urgent business, meeting is closed. Thank you. Thank you. So long.
Yeah, I get better.
And Matt, see you again.